Greetings and welcome to Trinity Radio. I'm Jonathan Pritchett, and along with me is
Braxton Hunter.
And this is our 10th episode 10 of now y'all having to look at our faces, which for that I apologize.
Welcome to Trinity Radio with Dr. Braxton Hunter and Professor Jonathan Pritchett.
We're forgiven, we're shown mercy and grace, and our punishments probably aren't as harsh as they should be, even within this lifespan.
Do skeptics bring objections to the case? Of course they do. What's going on with you today?
They just don't like it. They don't like it that God is just and He has every right as creator to do what He wills.
God is the best explanation for the beginning of the universe.
Of now y'all having to look at our faces, which for that I apologize.
And welcome back. And today is a very special day at Trinity Radio because we are going to, it's probably been, Dr. Pritchett, since 2011 that Trinity Radio featured a response to questions from listeners. And it's not exactly that, but it's in the ballpark. We're going to be responding to our critics today. We have elicited some criticisms. Can you imagine?
Yes.
Can you imagine that anyone would be critical of us?
Quite easy to be critical of this show.
And things are happening. Things are happening right now. Things are really popping for Trinity Radio because while we don't have, the 1,800 regular hits that some of our friends have on their podcasts because we have been horribly inconsistent. We've started lately to really put a lot more emphasis into the show. As you can see, the set design. We've got a group on Facebook. If you're not a part of it, it's Trinity Radio Prime-Time Discussion.
Yes,
and we want you to.
And we also have been noticing we've tried to elevate our show by having Sensei Roth as a part of the show.
Sensei Roth is a welcome part of the show.
Yes.
You never know when bandits are going to break in here, and we need a karate expert to take care of us.
And someone to make sense.
It happens all the time. I hate when it happens.
Yes.
But what we're going to be doing today is responding to some of those criticisms, and there have been some criticisms. And but we also have a couple other special things that we're going to do. We're going to start off with a special thing today. We're going to kick it over to Sensei Roth, who has a statement. We did. This is a part of the Trinity Radio Primetime Discussion Facebook group. Is we put up a hint. This is the first time we ever did it. We put up a hint, an image hint of what next week's episode is going to be about. It was a rainbow this time that had been drawn with crayons, and it ended up that our last episode was on coloring for Jesus and Christian merchandise. And one of our newest listeners actually came pretty darn close. So I said, we're going to give it to him. And the deal was, if you guess correctly, or you're the closest to guessing correctly, then we'll read a statement of your choosing, so long as it is appropriate and not heretical or blasphemous, on our next podcast. And so we have a winner. And so Sensei Roth, read dutifully the magical statement.
Absolutely. So this comes from Ian Buchanan, obviously from Scotland, as was said. It's from our president, Woodrow Wilson, and the statement is, every line of strength in American history is a line colored with Scottish blood. So Ian thought that was very appropriate, as he's also Scottish, and just wanted us to know that, again, apparently everything in American history has something to do with Scotland.
Well,
yes.
I think what prompted that partly was that the episode that he correctly guessed had to do with coloring. And our history was colored by Scottish blood. Very clever. It was clever. Ian's clever. Ian is also apparently, I didn't know this, he's a new student at Trinity. He found Trinity Radio by Googling, and then he ended up becoming a student here. We've had several students who have come to us that way, and so we're excited to have Ian. Ian, we're glad that you're a part of the program.
We are. The only things I know about Scotland, though, come from Highlander and Braveheart.
I'll tell you something that's true in Scotland that's also true in this room. You're going to have to talk louder into that mic, buddy.
Okay.
But Highlander.
Highlander. Everything I know about Scotland comes from Highlander and Braveheart.
You know what's funny about that? And we will get to the show.
And the University of Edinburgh.
We went to this. We got a new dog. His name is Indiana. We named the dog Indiana. And Indiana was taken to get his stitches out from a surgical procedure that was done on him. And we went to Henderson, Kentucky, across the money-saving bridge from where we are right now. And it was an older lady, like an older lady. And she said, Indiana. She said, like, we named the dog Indiana? And Sarah said, my wife said, yes. And she said, yeah. She said, I love Indiana Jones. She said, primarily, I love it because of Sean Connery.
Who is also from Scotland.
Yes. And she said, and if you love him, you will love the Highlander films. He's in the Highlander films.
Yes, the first one in the horrible sequels.
And she said, I've seen all the Highlander films. I think this older lady. Anyway.
The first one's the only one worth watching.
Yes. Which is not true of Indiana Jones. All I know is that when the dog, and only the Indiana Jones fans will get this, but whenever the dog does something wrong, I bust into the room and I go, look what you did. I can't believe what you did. What's going on with you today? It's like you're trying.
I wanted that to fall flat, and so I made
You're
sure
trying to make it
looked
fall
like
flat. It's not going to fall flat. It's not going to fall flat. I know our audience.
That's the type of Scottish accent that Americans love, and Ian's going to look at it and go, what?
I don't know. If he does, I got news for you. I think he's being pretentious. Because here's the deal. Whenever Scottish people or anybody comes over here and is a famous actor and they try to do an American accent, I don't notice. What are we talking about here? Let's get off of Sean Connery. Let's get off of the dog, and let's get on to some atheistic comments. We have a video version of the podcast where and it's a YouTube channel where I also post some topical videos. And so every Monday you get a topical video from me, and I have we have the podcast on Wednesday. And we've been pretty consistent. In fact, those of you who are longtime listeners should appreciate that we have been pretty darn consistent.
We do it for you.
But I did a video on arguments from evil. I think it was called Why Does God Allow Bad Things to Happen? And it elicited some atheistic comments. And I've been pretty rigid about this with the few negative comments we've gotten. If someone's just doing a drive-by nasty comment that is just, oh, your God's a megalomaniac who is racist and homophobic and all that. In fact, one guy did that. I responded and said, well, interesting. If you want to have an intelligent, respectful conversation, I'd be happy to have that. Otherwise, please don't come back to this channel. And so that same guy turned around and gave us some good, he was respectful. But we had a couple of those. And so we're gonna listen to what people had to say about the argument from evil. If you want to pause this and go back and listen to that video, it'll only take you like 5 minutes to go listen to the video. And then come back. Actually, I think it's 9 minutes. And then come back and you'll understand better what we're doing here. Okay, so the first comment comes to us from a man named John Hammond. John Hammond, anybody? John Hammond? No? Nothing? John Hammond has no business talking about our God being a megalomaniac who just loves to enjoy watching suffering. Because after all, it was John Hammond who pulled out the DNA from a mosquito embedded in some tree sap and created a few varieties of dinosaurs and put them into a park.
So are we talking about Jurassic Park?
Yes. This is John Hammond. And John Hammond says, let's look at the flood story. God could have killed all the people painlessly if he had wanted to, and at the same time not kill all the animals as well. That would have arguably been the action of a loving God. But your God killed not only all the people, but all the animals as well by drowning them all. This is not the way a loving God would kill all the people and drown all the animals as well. What did the animals do to suffer like that? Do you appreciate what a horrible death drowning is? Picture the scene, the ark floating along as the dead bodies of little children bump up against the hull, their little faces distorted by their struggle to take a breath as the water filled their lungs, as they screamed for their mothers. Unless you can explain why your God did it this way and kill all the animals too and still be a loving God, I will still see your mythical God as no more than a mythical monster. Okay, let me just give the typical preamble. We do think that arguments from evil are not only the best that atheists can do, but they actually should give Christians pause. You walk through a cancer ward with a bunch of little children who are struggling with leukemia or something, and it is something that it should make us take a step back and think seriously and soberly about these things, because this is a serious question. And for that reason, Christian philosophers have for a long time tried to provide serious, what are called theodicies, or answers for how God is just in spite of such suffering. But nevertheless, we can respond to this guy. Christianity, the history of the Christian faith, has given us ways to respond to this that we think are likely to be true. Do you want to take a stab at this, Pritchett, as we consider this to begin with?
Well, the flood story, of course, is an instance of divine justice. So it's not like it's a natural evil that needs to be kind of grappled with or explained. We know what happens. Every thought of every human was only wicked continually. And God had had enough of it, And so when you offend God, there will be punishment. And that we in the modern world want to look at that and think, oh, that's horrible. Why not just make them all drop instantly dead? I mean, after all, we know that God can do that. He did it in Acts.
Sure.
But, a display like that, for which the world since, and so many ancient Mediterranean cultures having their own version of that story, even though they speak of it differently, they attribute it to non-existent gods and all of that. Yahweh made his point, I think. And it was pure grace that there was an ark and a family saved and animals saved. Now, what most people hear an answer like that, they just don't like it. They don't like it that God is just and he has every right as creator to do what he wills. And in this instance, he willed to bring about justice against a wicked creation. And of course, at the end of it, he made a promise that he would never do that again.
Right.
And that is a promise that he was not obligated to make either. So, for Christians, even though that answer may not even sit well with some Christians, our life is a gift.
Sure.
We should thank God that he's not doing that to us, even though the entire earth has earned it again through our wretched works.
Right.
So,
Well, here's the thing. First of all, to kind of set things up the way you just did, there is the philosophical problem of suffering, and then there is the emotional problem of suffering. This is what everybody says. Alvin Plantinga says this. Craig says this. We say this. The fact is, we can't do anything to help you with the emotional problem of suffering. Yeah. The counseling department down the hall, they do a better job at that than we can. Sure. But they ultimately can't resolve that completely, because it's still going to be a problem when, Sensei Roth, your mother dealt in that realm for a while, right? What is it your mother did for a living?
Social worker and then clinical director of an agency that focused on counseling. Yeah, I mean, she did trauma counseling. She was one of the best trauma counselors in Indiana for years.
So she was a woman who dealt more with the emotional side of suffering. So she would do a better job at that than me and Dr. Pritchett would. But nevertheless, we can't ever take away, no one can take away completely the emotional distress that you will experience with great suffering. Only God can ultimately be your solace there. But with the philosophical problem here, we can say some things about this. First of all, let me just clear away this animal business for a second. He's talking about why didn't God, at the very least, he didn't have to let these animals suffer this way. Well, there are different ways that Christian apologists tackle this. William Lane Craig, for example, loves to point to the work of Michael Murray, a philosopher who has done work on animal suffering. And the answer that he gives is, there's good reason to believe, and by the way, I'll just tell you that I'm skeptical.
Yeah, I don't buy this.
I'm skeptical of this answer. I'll just tell you right now, and everybody knows what a big Craig head I am, but I'm a little bit skeptical of this answer. But I will present it.
Yes.
What he says is that animals don't suffer in the manner that we do, and with what we mean when we say suffering. And what we mean by that is animals certainly experience pain, right? If you kick a dog, it's going to yelp. But they don't have the capacity, this new research would seek to demonstrate, to reflect on their suffering in the way that we do. In other words, they're not going to be sitting around after the pain has gone away, thinking all day about how awful it is when you're in pain. Right?
Or while they're in pain.
Or even while they're in pain,
Right.
thinking about this existential crisis of the pain that they're experiencing.
They're in pain. It's the self-awareness and reflection of being in pain that they don't experience that humans do. And I don't know.
That's one answer. Now, here's the thing. I don't think that's true, because when I look into Indiana's eyes after he has done something he knows he should not have done, and there's been at least 3 or 4 times so far, I see the shame. I see the suffering psychologically. I think anyone who's had an animal, can you attest to this?
Yeah, I actually got a dog. I adopted him from the pound, and they told me, no, he's fine. He was a big dog, too. He's a half German Shepherd mix. And I said, no, he's had a great history. Well, he hadn't. His former owners were apparently abusive and abandoned him. And I figured this out within like 30 seconds of meeting him for the first time, because I moved a little too quick, and this big 110-pound dog cowered away from me, and he got pretty aggressive with a lot of men that he was encountering until we worked through that, and he had a lot of food aggression issues because obviously he hadn't been fed often. Yeah, I mean, animals are, at least through classical conditioning, they know that a repeated thing is going to happen repeatedly, and they can be afraid of it, they can be enticed by it. But yeah, this idea that no, they don't have any thoughts at all, that's just not true.
So anyway, if you want
Sorry, Craig.
Yeah, we saw the disdain on Adam's face when he...
Just that part. Everything else he's ever said, I've loved. But I mean, I grew up in an animal-loving family, and so we don't treat, we don't think they're
they would
people.
say, well, the pushback is you're not seeing that in his eyes. You're imagining it in his eyes.
Yeah.
And you're same thing with.
I'm like displacing my thoughts onto him.
Right.
What do you call it?
Anthropomorphism.
Projecting.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it would be in. But here's the thing.
Yeah, I still don't buy it.
So let's just say though that so long as that's even possibly true, that handles that.
Yeah.
But secondly, here's the deal. I think this is disingenuous to be concerned about these animals this way, the animal suffering. To say that God is not a good God if he does that to animals. And I'll tell you why I think this is a disingenuous criticism from our atheist friend, who I do believe that John Hammond, the founder of Jurassic Park, I think that he's being disingenuous for the following reason. If someone makes that argument, okay, well then you better not ever again for the rest of your life swat a mosquito. Because when you swat a mosquito, you are saying, you are demonstrating that you're not concerned about this, right?
Right.
A thing just barely annoyed you, and you killed it. Now, the argument that could come is, well, yeah, but that's a very low level, cognitively low life form, and it is true. Like I think many insects, we now know have about the capacity, the cognitive capacity of, I wouldn't call it cognitive, but the sophistication of thinking. Some of our computers now have surpassed that or are about at that. So, are they even self-aware at all? What's going on there? But let's say, where does it come then? Like this guy, I'm sure, would say, well, yeah, but if you get up to some higher primates, closer to evolutionarily speaking where we are from his perspective, these are more like persons, and they seem to be more self-aware. Well, okay, but you know what you've just done when you've said that? You've created an arbitrary spectrum, and you're the one who decides where on that spectrum that comes. And who are you to be the arbiter of when that becomes a being that it is wrong to swat like a mosquito, right? So I don't take this concern to be all that compelling or genuine.
I don't take the concern to be all that compelling or genuine about any animal suffering from anyone who affirms global warming. And the reason why is the whole argument of global warming is that human behavior destroys not just our trees and plants and the greenhouse and all that. It also affects animal life. And I'm like, yeah. And the fall of man from the Garden of Adam, what men do affects the domain in which God gave men to have dominion. And so when human beings live in opposition to God, it is our fault as wicked sinners that animals suffer too. Because human beings were set to have dominion, to subdue and all of that, and to have dominion over the animal kingdom. And so if you affirm global warming, you already can't reject the idea that men do bad things
that affect all of creation.
That affect all of creation.
Yeah. The
same principle applies to the fall of man and to the wickedness of man and to the sinfulness of man. And so when men, where God just turns them over to where, their wickedness is their own punishment, or he brings a miraculous act of judgment against man, or however it is, sin of human beings does affect even the animal kingdom and, plant life and everything else. So if you affirm global warming, then on principle you can't make this objection.
So that's a really good point. And I remember you first made that point to me a couple of years ago, and I thought it really sung and was good. But there's another issue here that kind of stands behind what we're saying, which is to say, Lawrence Krauss, for example, did this in his debates with William Lane Craig, and other people do it. This guy's doing it, which is when we come to this issue, the problem of suffering, including like the atrocities of the Old Testament, the flood story, all of this stuff, what they do is they want to take a piece of the Christian worldview and say, okay, let's just say that your God does exist. Now, this is evil, right? Doesn't work like that. If you're going to try and find out whether our worldview is coherent, whether or not it makes sense, you've got to put on, so to speak, the whole worldview.
Right.
And assume that it's true for the purposes of your thought analogy, even if you're an atheist, and say, okay, do these clothes work? Is this coherent? Does this make sense? And if you do that, you don't just get to take your 21st century ideas about what should be right or wrong. For example, he didn't do this critic, John Hammond, but some do it this way. They say the statements about the sin of homosexuality, that homosexuality is sinful, that doesn't work because that's immoral to say that homosexuality is sinful. So if your God affirms or does not affirm homosexual behavior, then your God is wicked. Well, now hold on a second. Whoa, hold on just a second. You've got to put on the whole outfit, right? And see if it's coherent. You can't take your morals and a piece of what the Bible gives you about God and then see if they jive together, because that's just begging the question of what we're trying to get to the bottom of to begin with, right? So if you put on all the clothes and you say, okay, then you realize that putting on all the clothes of that worldview, of the Christian worldview, what happened in the flood, or what happens in the atrocities of the Old Testament when children die? Death is not the end. This guy talks about little children and their bodies floating up against the hull of the ark and their distorted faces. They drowned there that day and all that kind of thing. He talks about that like that is the worst imaginable thing that could happen to a human being. And the fact is, of course, that's awful. I don't want to take away from that that's awful. But for us, within the Christian worldview, that's not the end. Death is not the end. Death is what? Death is a doorway, right, to another world. And, in fact, if these children, and I'm not the first to make this case, Paul Copan, William Lane Craig, if those children had grown up in a pagan society and likely would have become pagan idolaters
and
of
as
some
evil
sort.
as the parents who got killed.
They would have had, according to New Testament revelation, eternity separated from God, whereas, as it stands, that was a horrible thing that happened to them from their perspective, but eternally beneficial in that now they're in the arms of God forever.
Yes, and
so you got to put on the whole outfit.
Right. And however long that span was of drowning compared to eternity in heaven is
right.
And the adults obviously probably did not end up in the same place, but didn't deserve to. And one of the things that John Hammond has to realize is the same thing that the three of us have realized, which is it's not just what about those babies' bodies bouncing up against the ark. John's body, Adam's body, your body, my body, all of our bodies deserve to be drowning and slamming against the ark in the water on the outside of the boat. That's what we deserve. Now, you compare your actions in your life to God's law, and, wearing that outfit, you will see, I've pretty much violated all of it. Mm-hmm. And so when you can exercise a little bit of humility and say, I'm a wicked sinner, that's probably what I deserve too.
And you've got to resist, as the skeptic, you've got to resist the tendency to want to say, but I'm not, and it's not. And hold on a second. Again, you're not wearing the clothing of this worldview to see if it's coherent. You're trying to say, according to the way you think, based
You're
on
not as
whatever your
bad.
worldview is,
Yeah.
it's not fair. A similar
But
thing to
that fails to grasp the absolute holiness of Yahweh.
Amen.
You know, that's part of the outfit too. And when you compare yourself to that, it's your body that deserves to be bouncing up against the hull of the ark.
Yes, and
You know?
here's another thing about it. God as the God of justice, as the judge, the great judge, you said a moment ago, this is an act of justice. This was a judgment on wicked people who had an opportunity to do otherwise, to turn
God
from their
as
wicked
their
ways,
creator,
right?
yeah.
And but here's the thing. Then you know what that means. That means that in this case, and I know this sounds horrible to people who do not have a biblical worldview. That's my computer. Don't freak out. It won't happen again. But I know that sounds horrible to people who have a non-biblical way of thinking. But here's the deal, folks. This means, if this was an act of justice, that not only this instance, but also Joshua and all that happened in Canaan and all that driving out the atrocities, Jericho, all that stuff, this actually isn't a bad thing anymore, even though it was bad in another sense for the people experiencing it.
Well, it was gruesome.
It was gruesome. It was bad. I agree with William Lane Craig. It was probably, worst of all for the Israelite soldiers who had to actually carry out the killings, because now they have to live with the memories of all the killing. But here's the deal. If that is the just thing, that they had hundreds of years to repent in the case of Canaan, and they hadn't, and God sent this justice, he used Israel as his judging rod, so to speak, then guess what that means? That means this isn't a bad thing. This is actually a good thing. This actually becomes a good thing. It would have been bad not to do the justice, unless you don't think justice is a good thing, right? So you got to put your, the emotional impact of it aside. Now, one other aspect to John Hammond's thing that we could discuss, which is this. And I found a renewed appreciation for this sort of theodicy. Really, what Hammond has an issue with here is not just the fact that these kids died in Noah's flood. He has an issue, I would imagine we could say, your problem is that God did this, but you've also got another problem. I think he does mention this too, that God didn't prevent child suffering in other cases, right? Why does God allow children to be molested or raped or killed or whatever else that happens to children? That you've got objections to that too, right, John Hammond? Yeah, he does. And he does say, I think if you go read the comments on that YouTube video, you can see it. Yeah, okay. Well, okay, so let's imagine then the world, according to physics and everything else, the way you're describing it. What you would have is every time some kid runs off the edge of a cliff, for example, that like Roadrunner and Coyote, he just kind of stands there in the middle of the air, or he floats like a sheet of paper to the bottom of the cliff and isn't hurt. Or if he takes a knife and sticks it into his friend, it becomes like Play-Doh and just doesn't hurt his friend. Or he could play in traffic and be perfectly safe because all the cars would just become translucent or whatever and pass through him. Is that what we're thinking of? And if that were the case, number one, it would mess up what we call divine hiddenness. There'd be a coercion of belief, right? Because God is not hidden anymore. You don't really. And then secondly,
it would be an irrational cosmos.
It'd be irrational. And what that would lead to then is actually horrible for these kids.
Yeah.
Because then they become adults and all of a sudden, I don't know, age 18. I mean, what are the rules here? Boom. Now stuff can kill them. Is that what we're saying? And okay, well, these kids are not prepared now for adult life. So there's all kinds of problems with this sort of thinking. Yeah. And I laid all that out for him. You can go read it if you want, but I thought we'd give a smattering of it here.
And here's the point. Mankind in the garden had a shot at a deathless world. They rejected it. I'm not convinced by human behavior in the history of the world that we wouldn't continue to reject it. If Adam had not have messed it up, Braxton would have, or I would have.
I'll take ownership. Yes, yeah. I would have messed it up.
Adam is, when Christian theology says,
if Adam didn't, Braxton would.
Yeah. But I'm talking about like Adam and Eve.
If either Adam,
typologically, the man from dirt, any man from dirt, anyone in Adam,
any of all the Adams.
Yeah, I am convinced that in a cosmos with libertarian free will, somebody would have fallen. And even our Calvinists, some of them would even say that Adam and Eve had that kind of free will. We just lost that after the fall. So, somebody at some point had Adam and Eve not fallen, probably would have fallen. Mankind had their shot. Didn't go well. But I do want to say this. To right that wrong, the Father sent the Son, Jesus, to bear our sins.
Preach it, brother.
Yeah. And raised Jesus from the dead.
Amen.
So that there will be another deathless world that we can participate in if you repent and believe the gospel.
So now you have a heaven theodicy on top of everything else.
Right.
So, and Sensei Roth, if you ever want to jump in, you can feel free to jump in.
So on this, the children suffering thing, I can't cure leukemia, I can't cure cancer. I can absolutely contribute to funds that go to large pharmaceutical corporations that some ways try to address that. Okay, that's a whole other issue. But when you're asking me, well, why does God allow a child to be raped? He doesn't. Why does God allow, a child to be victimized? He doesn't. And here's how. If I'm in a situation where I know a child is going to be raped, I will stop it. I will do everything in my power or I will die trying. God doesn't allow it, but it's through me. It's through Christians. I don't know of any true Christian that could go, I don't care if children get raped. I wouldn't do everything in my power. And I'm not talking kind of as an abstract, I give to these organizations. I'm telling you, in that situation, not a single one of them, even the old and frail, would do everything in their power to try and stop it. So we're the medium. I can't explain other than that. But yeah, I can promise you that my God does not allow children to be raped. And I live out those tenets. Now, I'm not in every situation. I'm not Superman. No one in here is. But I absolutely stand firm on that.
Yeah, it's what do you mean by allow? It's a sin. God is not, and there's a sense in which God doesn't allow as if it's permissible in God's universe to do it. But there's also a sense where God allows it because God doesn't directly intervene himself to prevent it.
Okay, yeah, because that helps, because I was listening to you and I was thinking, okay, but here is a good way to say what I think you just said. The law does not allow for you to go 75 miles an hour on the Lloyd Expressway.
Right.
It does not allow for that.
It would be helpful if it did.
But if you go 75 miles an hour and a police officer doesn't pull you over, or he pulls you over and gives you mercy or whatever, he allowed it when he could have stopped it. He could have pulled you over, right? In that sense, if you don't have a deterministic cosmos, if you do believe that God gave man libertarian freedom, like we believe, like all three of us believe, that he gave us free will to make choices that are genuine choices. And for that reason, you can't blame God with certain things. The fact is that then when an evil does happen, it's man's fault. It's somebody's fault. It doesn't mean it's your fault if the evil happened to you, right? That's also important to say. That was the mistake of Job's comforters. They thought, with their limited, unsophisticated theological positions, if something bad is happening to you, Job, you did something wrong. And my grandmother thought that way too, but that's not necessarily the case. But the fact is, if an evil does happen, it's not God's fault. But he did allow it in the sense that he could have stopped it, and he didn't stop it. So he allowed it. But his law does not allow for it. Right? And I think that's a good way of saying it. And because what we really want to affirm here is God did not want those children's bodies in the water at the flood.
No.
Right?
Not in his consequent will. Not in his antecedent will. Now, his consequent will is if you sin, there will be consequences for it. His antecedent is like a parent. I know that our Reformed friends have their own understanding of a secret will and a prescriptive will, but I don't see any evidence of that. But what I do see is the same kind of evidence that God has that we have with our own children, for example, or your even employees. As president of the seminary, your antecedent will is that everyone does their job well. But if Adam is embezzling money, the consequent will is he's going to be fired and you're going to press charges, right?
Yeah, I say it like this. I say, I want my kids to go to college.
Right.
Right? I want both my daughters to go to college, but I also want them to make their own choices as they follow God's leadership, right? So in a certain sense, you can say I have two wills, right?
Well, an antecedent will and a consequent
Right.
will.
I will on the one hand that they go to college. I will on the other hand that they follow God's leading, and they may not go to college. I want them to make a libertarian choice about that's informed. But really, I could state that as one will. I will that my children freely choose to go to college, right? So there's different ways of playing with that.
And you also freely will that your children clean their bedroom and obey their mother and you. That's your antecedent will, but your consequent will is if they don't,
there's going to be consequences.
They're going to get a paddling, even though they're princesses, right?
Yeah. I do tell a story about that. No, I'll say it. I have spanked my children, and anybody here who wants to write in and tell me about it, prepare to have your comment deleted because I know that is increasingly becoming a less cool thing.
Okay, well, I'll go down the ship with you. I spanked my kids when they were younger.
Yeah. I mean, look,
I was spanked, and I'm not on Oprah's couch crying about it. So
yeah.
I think my parents are probably bad.
That's not as prevalent of a thing as you thought. I owned a karate school for years, and I had people that tried to pay me to spank their kids. And you think I'm kidding, and I'm not. That's not this whole spanking children is. I'm not taking a stance because I'm not a parent.
Is that like a phony outrage thing rather than like a real thing?
I believe it's from a very small sector that tries to make themselves seem bigger than they are.
I'll tell you this,
because I see parents whipping kids in Walmart.
Well, yeah, and I'll tell you, there's been times when I've
talk about the problem of evil.
When I've disciplined my kids, and I don't think I've ever really. There may be one time with one of them, but I don't think I've ever disciplined my kids in anger. Like I was angry when I did it.
I don't think you get angry like most people do, though.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
You're very controlled. Temper.
But I demonstrate that on every episode. I'm just kidding. No, but I do. There have been times where I've disciplined one of them and felt like I went too far, and not like way went too far, but maybe just crossed the line in how harsh I was, whether it was a physical or a circumstantial punishment, and felt convicted about it. Yeah. And you know what I did? Repented, told them I repented and apologized. This stuff's going to happen. But I've never abused my children, right? And that's what everybody acts like you're doing if you do anything, physical. Or even now it's not even just physical, You could just be too harsh with them in terms of the punishment.
Right. You made them.
Why are we talking about this?
Well, it's a problem of evil. So
Yes,
kids naturally.
Am I a part of the problem of evil?
No, I was. We're talking about spanking, and I wanted to hear the princess story.
Oh, you want me to tell that?
Yeah, it's funny.
Okay. So whenever Jacqueline, our second born, was being born, when Sarah was pregnant with her, I think it was like 3 weeks until delivery. And we went and took a trip to Indianapolis. They've got an incredible children's museum up there. It's a 4-story playground, funded as a children's museum. Although they do have the Cross of Coronado there and Indy's hat and whip. But we went up there, and it was just going to be a fun weekend with Jolie because the point was we wanted her to understand that even though there was a new child and she's going to have a baby sister, and a lot of the attention would go to the baby, we still loved her, we still cared about her, blah, blah, blah. So we went up there and we were having ice cream, we were doing all this stuff and having a good time. But she's a good kid. She's
I'm
amazed with Jolie. But
yes,
that particular day, and she was like, 3 years old. And she was there's a few times where she's just being rotten, And I kept doing something. I kept threatening her without following through. I wonder how many parents watching have made that mistake. And I kept saying,
made that mistake.
You haven't?
I have.
You have? And I've said, sweetheart, if you don't get your act together, Daddy's going to spank you. And she just kept doing it, and I kept not spanking her because we don't want to ruin the vibe of a good trip. Well, finally, at the end of the day, I said, you cut that out or I'm going to spank you. And she said, Daddy, you won't spank me. And I said, I won't. And she said, no. And I said, why not? And she said, because I'm a princess. And I looked at her and I said, you may be a princess, but if you're the princess of this family, that makes me the king. And the princess is about to turn red on her backside. And I took her into the back of a Target parking lot and got into the back seat with her. And the princess cried. It was sad. But you know what? I really do believe that part of the reason she has turned out to, and I'm not saying I'm this great parent, but I think part of the reason she's turned out to be such a good kid is because we did discipline her and we made sure
Right.
she knew there were consequences
Right.
to acting like a crazy person.
Now that's with a small child doing that in a little corner of the world. Now think about actually horrific evils on a mass. Just think of the 20th century, for example, on the mass. Not just discipline, but justice. I mean, God disciplines us as Christians that we'll have to face consequences in this life for our sinful actions. He doesn't. We're forgiven. We're shown mercy and grace, and our punishments probably aren't as harsh as they should be, even within this lifespan. But when you think about the horrible evils of creation and how it probably does deserve another flood, even though there hasn't been one, which we
Feels
can
like
thank
it's
God for.
time.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying if you think about it,
Yeah, I know what you mean.
to have a God be indifferent to that amount of evil and not bring justice against it is a God who is evil, in my view.
Yes, to not give it's like those people who are against the death penalty. And frankly, I'll tell you, I wrote a paper against the death penalty, hypothetically for a class a couple of years ago. But you got to ask your question. That's my phone. Don't freak out. That I need to get better about that kind of stuff. Right. But think about the death penalty for just a second. What represents justice? You got a guy who's killed some people, raped some people, all the above. Let's just take a clear example, right? He's killed several people, he's raped people, he's not insane, all right? He can't get off on that. So this guy, what's the most just thing? To put him to death? Or to have the victims, families, who are themselves victims thereby, to fund this guy's health and well-being to the tune of hundreds of thousands of dollars for the rest of his life? That seems like an inverse of justice.
Right.
Although I can argue it the other way. This way is the one that helps my point right now. And so even though something that may seem like a bad thing or a horrific tragedy or something like the judging of Canaan, you think that's actually justice and therefore is a good thing, like we were saying before, right? I was going to go to a passage in the Bible, but now I don't know what I'm doing. So let's move on to the next criticism this guy brings, and then I don't know how much longer are we going to go on this show. Let's see, we've been at this for 44 minutes. We're going to make this a two-parter. Is that okay with you?
Yeah.
This will be a two-parter. It'll be a series, and that'll give us more ammunition for the next show. But so here's the thing. John Hammond then comes back around. And what he ends up saying is, actually, this is not the best argument atheists can bring. He's an atheist. He's saying, I don't agree. The best argument, quote, the best argument, in my opinion, is the fact borne out by overwhelming evidence that we are just an intelligent ape and the product of the biological evolution of our species. And we became intelligent enough to invent religions and gods, as history proves. And then he goes on, and others go on in the comment stream to talk about the whole thing of I call it the development of religion argument, that and let me just try to state it fairly, this sort of thing that when people were evolution happens and people are finally sufficiently cognitively sophisticated that guy goes out hunting one day, primitive man goes out hunting one day, and on this particular day he sees a butterfly flutters right in front of his face, and then he has a successful hunting thing. And then the next day, same thing. He sees another butterfly. Coincidence, but he sees it. And now he's starting to think that the butterfly is responsible for his hunting. So now he starts to pray to the butterfly. He starts to, and then before very long, he has an unsuccessful hunting day, or it's too hot, or it's too cold, or really whatever can happen. And it's either the butterfly god blessing him or cursing him, right? Or say a bear. He sees a bear that's got this particular white patch on the bear so that he can remember it. And this bear, he sees this bear, and then he has a successful hunting expedition. And then the bear's gone. The bear's gone for a while. The bear must have died. But then, next season, the bear is back. Hallelujah. The bear resurrected, right? And this is a bear god who resurrects and all this. And so, therefore, you're often running with a religion, and the superstition just kind of carries it along. That is the criticism, that we know how religions form. They form like that, or something like that.
Right.
Therefore, all religions are false. Go.
Number one, it's non sequitur. Number two, there could actually be a butterfly god. How he came to.
Well, are you saying there could actually be a butterfly god?
For the purposes of to demonstrate the flaw.
Because you did color a butterfly just the other day. Are you starting the...
Maybe. It's happiness,
Yeah.
But, okay, let's say that that's how he came to have this belief in the butterfly god.
Okay.
That doesn't prove it false. He's just committed the genetic fallacy.
Right.
Like the whole evolutionary argument for religion, and I think his name is Pascal Boyer, wrote a book on this. Religion Explained or something. I can't remember. I read it a long time ago. Anyway, it all rests on a genetic fallacy anyway. So it's irrelevant.
Wait, so a genetic fallacy, because we have a lot of people interested in logical fallacies. A genetic fallacy is calling a view false
because of how you came
because of how someone came to that view. So, for example, I may have come to believe that the earth is round because I read it in a comic book. And you say, well, that's false because you learned that in a comic book. Well, now hold on. The reason I came to believe the earth is round may be a ridiculous reason.
But the earth is still round.
But the earth still is round, right? I'm right, even if the way I got there was ridiculous. So there could be a butterfly god, even if the way someone arrived at that was superstition.
Right. And so that's for that example, or if you want to use Christianity as an example, you were born in a Christian nation, that's why you came to believe Christianity's true. Irrelevant to whether or not Christianity is true.
Right.
The second thing is I'm not a theistic evolutionist, but a theistic evolutionist answer, so what? That's just how God brought about mankind. I mean, in fact, William Lane Craig turns that around and says, it's so improbable that evolution actually produced the variety of life that we had that it's almost a divine miracle if you wanted evolution, which I don't believe in evolution, but I'm just saying...
Craig got that from Plantinga.
Yeah.
Plantinga makes that case. He's saying statistically or probabilistically speaking, it is so improbable that given the amount of time that we believe the earth has existed, that evolution would have gotten to this point, that if evolution is true, it's one of the better arguments for God's existence.
Right. And so again, that's probably, I don't know why he would think that was the best. We dismissed it in 30 minutes.
But the thing is, it's also like you've hit all the points, but like, first of all,
it's not worth more time than that.
Well, no, but this is good. This is
Sorry,
good.
John.
No, this is a good educational moment, because here's how I say it. Let's say that I'm the worst Easter egg planner ever, and I have a field and I have put 999 Easter eggs out there that are completely empty. And I've put one Easter egg out there that's actually got a Hershey's Kiss in it.
So you're the author of evil.
That would be. Yeah, that's good. But here's the thing. So if someone were to go out there and open 100 of the Easter eggs and find that they're empty, would it follow logically to say, therefore, all the Easter eggs are empty?
No.
Absolutely not. And in the same way, whenever skeptics say anything like this, like they say, this is how some religions developed, therefore this is how all religions developed.
Right.
What they're saying is, I found a bunch of empty Easter eggs, therefore they're all empty, right? Or when other atheists say, and this has become an atheist tagline, is they say, you're an atheist, if you're a Christian, with respect to all the other gods. I just believe in one less God than you do, right? Well, okay, well that's absurd. They're trying to say to you, you reject all these other religions, why not therefore just reject them all? Right? Well, no, because there may be one that's true. Just because there's a bunch that are false doesn't mean there's not one that's true. Right. And if
you believe in God, you're not an atheist. An atheist is one who lacks a belief in God or gods. And if you believe in one God, then you have a belief in a God or God.
Atheism, A is the negator.
Right. I mean, so that's atheists really, they must hate words, or they just need to stop with the dumb. I mean, I get it. Christians do dumb taglines too, but atheists,
same thing with saying,
better.
I simply lack a belief in God. They say, I'm simply unconvinced. I don't know, but I haven't seen enough evidence. Well, you got an A word for that too. Agnostic, right? That's I don't know. Atheism is one who maintains there is no God.
Yeah, but atheists have made agnosticism unpopular by poo-pooing agnosticism and say, get some guts and.
Yeah, some have, but then the other atheists have just said, we're going to make atheism now agnosticism. And then what you're talking about that we used to call atheism, Well, that's anti-theism, right? And it's like, we're just shifting around terminology here. This is why if you listen to the debates I've had with skeptics, I just let them call it whatever they want. Tell me what you believe, and let's talk about that, right? But yeah, so I actually believe it's probably likely true. Well, I think it's a certainty that a lot of religions have developed precisely the way he describes. Superstitions and such. Now, I think the demonic had something to do with most of those.
Right.
But I do believe he's probably right with respect to some religions. It just doesn't follow that all religions, therefore, started that way, or that one can't be true, because there's one of these Easter eggs that's got a Hershey's Kiss in it. And that is the worst analogy for Christianity we've ever heard. But on the evolution thing, I brought that up with him. He kept saying, evolution is true, therefore Christianity is false. Well, hold on a second.
That's a non sequitur.
I'm not an evolutionist either, but here's the thing, and this will shock some folks that listen to our show. We've got one guy in particular, two maybe, that I know this is going to cause problems for. So just buckle your seatbelt, pal. But the thing is, I don't accept theistic evolution, like the belief in God and the belief in evolution. I don't believe that God used evolution to bring us to it. But here's the thing. If I found out tomorrow somehow conclusively, and I know people are going to say, well, they couldn't prove it conclusively because we could contest and blah, blah. Okay, fine. Understand how hypotheticals work. Let's imagine that it was proven conclusively that evolution is true in such a way that if you didn't believe it, you're an unreasonable man, right? Okay, then I guess I would believe in evolution. But you know what it would not mean? It would not mean, I guess Jesus didn't rise from the dead.
Right.
It would not mean that. It wouldn't mean God didn't exist. It would mean maybe, I guess I interpreted Genesis chapters 1 and 2 and 3 maybe. Genesis 1 really, and 2. It would mean I interpreted those wrongly. It wouldn't mean
Christianity is false.
It wouldn't even mean they were false. It wouldn't mean chapters 1 and 2 were false. It would just mean it tells me something about me, that I interpreted it wrong. Right?
Well, there's plenty that'll tell you that you did now.
Well, that's fine. I don't care if some young earth creationist wants to come after me about this. Guess what? I guess I have more faith than you that if evolution turned out to be true, I wouldn't lose my Christianity over it, right?
Old earth creationists would go after you too.
Well, sure. That's fine. And that's what I am. I am a creationist. I'm particularly an old earth creationist, but I'm a creationist. I reject evolution. I'm just saying if it turned out to be true, I wouldn't lose my faith over it.
I wouldn't either.
Right? Because it doesn't follow logically. Right. You had something to say.
I was just going to agree with you completely.
I love it when that happens.
I just think sometimes we draw lines in the sand about things that aren't important. Like we all believe in Jesus. We've given our hearts to Him. So what?
Do you believe in evolution?
No.
Yeah, I don't either.
Now I've taken classes on evolution, and I had a professor that tried to fail me out because he didn't know who wrote what. He tried to fail me out, and I got 105% in this class because I understood the concepts they were saying. I'm educated on it, but I don't believe it.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. But if we found out it, and look, we're not saying it's not important. That's an interesting and maybe an important debate because it will impact how you understand certain passages of the Bible.
Yeah,
it's important, but it's an important in-house debate, in my opinion, to have with people. Like I always tell my students in Contemporary Apologetics 1, when we come to a design argument, and I've got a video on the design argument on the YouTube account, but I say, look, don't get this design. You don't need to get into this argument about evolution with a lost person, with an unregenerate person. The important thing for them is to come to believe that God exists, God raised Jesus from the dead, and that what Jesus had to say is true, right? You can then have arguments with them about evolution in an in-house way after the fact. And if there's a presuppositionalist out there or a young earth creationist, a lot of times those people are the same, who want to argue with me about that, then fine. You can argue about that if you want. I'll be happy to talk about it. I like having those discussions, but I'm not going to spend my life wrestling with that issue. I'm going to be out using a design argument the right way and seeing people come to know the Lord Jesus Christ. So this guy tried to force me to hold to the Bible says evolution isn't true. And I'd say, well, there are people who don't understand it that way and they're still Christians. No, this has to be what the Bible says, and therefore it's false. Well,
since when did an atheist become the expert on what the Bible says?
Exactly. Oh, and one last thing before we shove off of John Hammond. He did say, and he was very respectful, very kind. And
I'm glad he
and
watches.
I've enjoyed, and these are important topics to cover. I don't mean to belittle him. But one last thing is, I always chuckle to myself a little bit when people tell me what God would do when they don't believe in God.
What they're saying is, this is what I would do if I
was God, right?
Yes.
And guess what? I got my own thoughts about that too, pal. If I was God, I don't know that I'd say David was a man after my own heart when he committed adultery and arranged to have the woman's husband killed on the front lines of battle.
Oh, and worse, I mean, his daughter got his
not
daughter
to
was
take
raped.
action when Tamar,
Right, and then the son does what David should have done, and then he said
Absalom.
Yeah.
And then he halfway forgives Absalom.
Yeah.
But not totally, and won't see him for 2 years?
Yeah.
And then Absalom rises up, and then after that's all done, and Joab handles it, right? Everybody's celebrating, and David's not acting like a king. He's up there in a tower somewhere crying about it, which I totally understand, but you've just made the wrong decision here. And you know what that tells you? People who have had a horrible sinful thing
can still be people after God's own heart, because David was a horrible person.
Well, that's true, but that wasn't what I was going to say. What I was going to say was...
at times, David was a horrible person.
Yeah, sure.
And yet he could still be a person
man after God's own heart.
Right, so if you're a horrible person, but you become a Christian, you could still be a person after God's own heart.
There's 2 points I want to make.
Because if David can, and David
there's 2 points I want to make. I'm glad you got to make
Yeah.
that point, but there's 2 points I want to make, and that was neither of them. The point number one was that when you have a serious moral failing of that caliber that David had, even though he was forgiven,
yes,
you still kind of seem to lose your moral authority. You know what I mean? He never had his kingdom never had the sheen on it after that it had before it happened with Bathsheba, that whole thing. And we saw him making these decisions.
And his family was a disaster.
And frankly, I can look back on my early ministry. I was much more bold and this is what it is and all that. And there's a good and a bad to that. But so that's one point I want to make. But the deeper point, the earlier point that I do want to make is, if I was God, if I'm telling you what I would do if I was God, not that. I'm not saying that. I'm not, and I'll tell you what else. On the other end of the spectrum, you're telling me Moses doesn't get to go into the promised land after what he went through? Are you kidding me? Because of that?
You'd have gone easier on Moses.
Oh, go on in. Okay, you messed up.
And if I was God, I wouldn't send my son to die for any of you. So, any of you could come to heaven. It'd be like, no.
Well, it's just there's a lot.
No way.
There's a lot that we would, if we were God, we say we would do. But here's the thing. I'm not, and a big part of my being not is I'm not privy to all the information that he's privy to, right? Or the character that he has, or holiness that you mentioned earlier that he has. I'm not the wise God that he is. And so for that reason, I'm wrong and he's right, whether I agree or not.
Amen.
So an atheist says, well, if I was God, I'd do it this way. Or if there was a God, he would act this way. I don't even know how to start with all the things wrong with that statement.
Right.
Okay, have we run out of steam on this when we've gone for an hour?
Yeah, I don't even think we need to do the follow-up.
So, you don't think we need to do another show on this?
No.
I do. We've got a great other couple of questions. And the next episode, we're going to focus on a criticism that is brought against guys like me and Pritchett and Sensei Roth from atheists, from open theists who don't believe God knows everything, either by choice or by nature, and by Calvinists. So this is a shared criticism of us from Calvinists, atheists, and open theists. By the way, I've gotten it from all three categories within the last 2 months. So you gotta, that's provocative.
Fine.
All right. We want you to come and, if you like, be critical of us respectfully as students at Trinity College of the Bible and Theological Seminary. We, in all of our webinar and even in some of our other classes that are not webinar video related classes, we have forums for discussion. Students can ask questions. They can challenge what the professor has said. They can challenge what one of the authors has said in one of the course texts in a respectful way. And we will be happy to talk with you about that also in a respectful way. And some of the people who are currently listeners to this show are Trinity students and have seen that happen. I'm thinking of one particular, Rob. Rob was a student at Trinity and has gotten into very heated but respectful debates with at least one professor, right? And I enjoyed it. it. I liked reading that
Professor
stuff.
Flowers.
Yeah. So
I think they did a podcast together too.
they did. I don't think they did yet, but they need to.
No, it's online.
When?
It was posted.
They do it last night? Was it posted this weekend?
That's a weird question to answer because this will be posted later.
No, this will be posted next week.
Yeah.
Um,
So none of these dates will make sense.
Yeah, but anyway.
There is a video.
It doesn't matter. The point is, you can come and do that, and we're cool with it. We want you to do that. We invite that kind of discussion because we think that iron sharpens iron. Also, if you'd like to audit classes, you can do that. It's like $35 a pop. You can come and audit this. One of these courses, and we don't think you should do it that way. We think you should get into a degree program, but we won't hold it against you if you audit a course, or you can learn very, very casually just by going to my website. I got a lot of free stuff there.
At BraxtonHunter.com.
BraxtonHunter.com. The YouTube channel, if you're listening to this by audio, is youtube.com/BraxtonHunter. That's how humble I am. youtube.com/BraxtonHunter. And so go there and subscribe. Also, I need to say this. Leighton Flowers says this on his podcast. We do get we've started to get a fair number of students coming based on these podcasts, and Leighton has too, coming to Trinity because of Leighton. And he always encourages people to tell him that Leighton Flowers, where they heard about it on his podcast. So we want you to do that too, because we want to be able to keep track of this. So if you sign up for classes or if you audit classes, if you contact us at all, us being Trinitysem, Trinitysem.edu, Trinity College of the Bible Theological Seminary, make sure you mention that you heard about us, or what motivated you to contact Trinity ultimately was an episode of Trinity Radio. Maybe you'll get something special out of that in terms of a little bit of help in the monetary department. Who knows? No promises, but it's worth trying. All right? We'll see you next time on Trinity Radio.